The cops called me about my own vacation house, after I'd been paying my parents' mortgage for 5 years. My parents had just given their family home to my sister as a wedding gift, completely forgetting who had been keeping them from foreclosure all these years. When they demanded to move into my vacation house, I said no. That's when everything went nuclear. The police involvement revealed a web of lies that destroyed our family forever. But what happened next proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply living your truth. I'm sitting in my lawyer's office right now, staring at 5 years' worth of bank statements spread across his mahogany desk. Each page shows the same thing. Rebecca Thompson, 2,147. 50, mortgage payment, Thompson Family Trust. Month after month, year after year. While my sister Sarah was planning her dream wedding, I was quietly keeping our childhood home from being repossessed. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm a software engineer who builds systems for a living, yet I completely missed the red flags in my own family's dysfunction. Maybe I was too close to see it, or maybe I just wanted to believe that family meant something different than what mine turned out to be. Our family home sits on Maple Street, a colonial with the rose garden my mother planted when Sarah and I were kids. Every Sunday dinner, we'd gather around that oak table in the dining room. Mom would make her famous pot roast. Dad would carve, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. Sarah would chatter about school drama, and I'd share updates from my tech job. Those dinners felt sacred, like we were building something lasting together. But even then, there were signs. Dad always introduced Sarah as our social butterfly, while I was the responsible one. Sho, Mom would beam when Sarah showed up with a new boyfriend, but when I bought my first house at 28, the response was, well, Rebecca's always been self-sufficient. It was praise wrapped in dismissal, love with conditions attached. When Dad got laid off from the plant 3 years ago and Mom's part-time job at the library couldn't cover their expenses, I didn't hesitate. They were facing foreclosure, and I had just gotten a promotion with a significant raise. Family helps family, right? It's just temporary, sweetheart, Dad had said, his voice heavy with what I thought was shame. Just until I get back on my feet. We'll pay you back every penny. I waved him off. Don't worry about it, Dad. We're family. That conversation happened in this very house I'm sitting in now, my vacation home in the mountains, the one I'd saved up for years to buy. It was supposed to be my retreat, my reward for all those 60-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder. Instead, it became the eye of the storm that would tear our family apart. The first crack in our perfect family facade came about 6 months after I started covering their mortgage. I was over for Sunday dinner when Sarah announced her engagement to Mark, this guy she'd been dating for barely a year. The room exploded with excitement. Mom started crying happy tears, Dad broke out the good wine, and everyone was talking about venues and guest lists. "We want a spring wedding," Sarah gushed, practically bouncing in her chair. "Something elegant, you know? Nothing too big, just family and close friends." I smiled and raised my glass, genuinely happy for her. Sarah had always been the romantic one, collecting wedding magazines since she was 15. She deserved her fairy tale moment, but then Mom dropped the bombshell that would haunt me for months. "Oh, and we've been thinking," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. "Well, what if we gave you and Mark the house as a wedding gift? You'll need somewhere to start your marriage, and this place has so many wonderful memories." The wine glass froze halfway to my lips. "Give her the house?" "Well, not immediately," Dad jumped in, probably seeing something in my expression. "After the wedding, of course. We've been thinking about downsizing anyway." I set my glass down carefully, my mind racing. "But Dad, you're still looking for work. And Mom, your hours at the library." I trailed off, not wanting to explicitly mention the mortgage payments in front of Sarah. "Oh, we'll figure something out," Mom said airily, already lost in wedding planning mode. "Sarah, we should call that wedding planner in town. What was her name?" The conversation moved on, but I sat there feeling like I'd been sucker punched. 562 days of mortgage payments. I knew the exact number because I'd been marking them on my calendar, counting down until Dad got back on his feet. Now they were talking about giving away the house I'd been saving. After dinner, I cornered Dad in his study. "Dad, can we talk about the house thing?" He looked up from his newspaper, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Annoyance? It was gone too quickly to tell. What about it, sweetheart? I've been covering the mortgage for over a year now. Shouldn't that be part of the conversation? Dad folded his newspaper with deliberate precision. Rebecca, you said yourself that money was a gift. You said not to worry about paying you back. I meant the money was a gift. I didn't mean the house should go to Sarah without any discussion. You're being dramatic. His tone had shifted, becoming slightly patronizing. Sarah's getting married. She needs stability. You have your own place, that nice vacation house. Sarah has nothing. Nothing? Sarah had a college degree I'd helped pay for, a fiancé with a steady job, and a family who celebrated every milestone in her life like she'd personally hung the moon. Dad, I just think… Rebecca. He stood up, suddenly looking tired. Your sister is starting a family. This house should stay in the family with the next generation. You'll understand when you settle down and have kids of your own. The dismissal was clear. I was 35, financially independent, and owned 2 properties, but apparently my life didn't count as settled because I wasn't married with children. I left that night feeling unsettled, but I told myself I was being selfish. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I was just being possessive about money that was supposed to be a gift. Over the next few months, the wedding planning consumed our family conversations. Every Sunday dinner became a recap of venue visits, dress fittings, and catering decisions. I found myself relegated to the role of supportive sister, expected to smile and nod while they planned to give away the house I was still quietly paying for. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When I'd try to bring up practical concerns about their post-wedding living situation, I was told I was overthinking things or being negative. When I suggested they might want to wait until Dad found steady work before making such a big decision, Mom would sigh and say, Rebecca, why can't you just be happy for your sister? The worst part was that they'd started calling my mortgage payments help instead of what they really were, the only reason they still had a house to give away. In their version of reality, I was the daughter who occasionally helped out, not the one who'd single-handedly prevented their foreclosure. 3 months before the wedding, the family group chat was created. Sarah's Big Day, Mom had named it, complete with wedding ring emojis. Every day brought new updates about flowers, musicians, and guest accommodations. I participated dutifully, offering suggestions and enthusiasm, but something had shifted in the family dynamic. I wasn't consulted about major decisions anymore. I was informed about them. We've decided to have the ceremony in the backyard, Sarah texted the group. It'll be so romantic with Mom's rose garden as the backdrop. Perfect, I typed back, even though something about it made my stomach clench. They were planning to use the garden I'd been inadvertently paying to maintain as the setting for a wedding that would culminate in them giving away the house. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. I loved my sister. I wanted her to be happy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being erased from the family narrative. 5 years of mortgage payments had somehow become irrelevant to the story they were telling themselves about generosity and family legacy. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made one last attempt to address the elephant in the room. I called Dad directly, hoping a private conversation might be more productive. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, sweetheart. If I hadn't been covering your mortgage, would you still be giving the house to Sarah? There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder somehow. Rebecca, I don't appreciate the implication that we're being ungrateful. We've never asked you to pay our mortgage. You offered. I offered because you were facing foreclosure, and we're grateful for your help. But that doesn't give you ownership rights to our decisions about our property. The word help again, as if my $60,000 over 5 years was just a casual gesture between family members. Dad, I'm not trying to control your decisions. I just want to understand how my contributions factor into this situation. Your contributions? Now he sounded irritated. Rebecca, you make 6 figures. This money isn't exactly a hardship for you. Meanwhile, Sarah's just starting out. She needs this house more than you need the money back. And there it was, the heart of their logic. Because I was successful, because I could afford to help, My financial sacrifice was somehow less meaningful than Sarah's need. My 5 years of responsibility were worth less than her 2 years of engagement. The conversation ended with Dad suggesting I search my heart about what family really means. I hung up feeling like I'd been gaslit by a professional. The wedding was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant in Mom's altered wedding dress. Mark cried during the vows, and the rose garden provided a perfect backdrop just as she'd envisioned. I played my role as the supportive older sister, smiling for photos and giving a heartfelt toast about love and new beginnings. But during the reception, while everyone celebrated the happy couple, I sat at my assigned table, not at the head table with immediate family, but at table 6 with some cousins I barely knew, and watched my parents beam with pride at their generosity. Several guests complimented them on giving such a meaningful wedding gift. "It's so wonderful that you can give them such a beautiful home," Mrs. Patterson from next door gushed to Mom. "What a way to start a marriage." Mom glowed under the praise. "We just want what's best for our children," she said, not once acknowledging the daughter who'd made this generosity possible. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the gifts had been stacked in what was now officially Sarah and Mark's living room, I stood in the kitchen where I'd eaten thousands of meals growing up. The house felt different already, like it belonged to someone else. Sarah found me there, still in her wedding dress but with her shoes kicked off. "Thank you," she said, hugging me tight. "I know you helped make this possible." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe someone in my family understood the magnitude of what had just happened. But then she continued, "Mom and Dad told me how you helped them out sometimes with expenses. It means so much that the whole family came together to make this day perfect." Sometimes. The word hit me like a slap. 5 years of monthly payments, and it had been reduced to sometimes helped with expenses. I hugged her back and told her I loved her because I did. But as I drove home to my apartment that night, leaving behind the house I'd saved and the family I'd supported, I realized I'd been cast as a supporting character in my own life story. The real betrayal came 2 months later. I was working late in my home office when my phone rang. Dad's contact photo appeared on the screen, a picture from last Christmas where he was wearing the ridiculous reindeer sweater Sarah had bought him. "Hi, Dad. What's up?" "Rebecca, we need to talk." His tone was serious, businesslike. "Can you come over to Sarah's tomorrow evening?" Sarah's, not the house or home. The transition was complete. "Is everything okay? We'll discuss it tomorrow, 7 o'clock. He hung up without his usual, "Love you, kiddo," and I stared at my phone, anxiety creeping up my spine. Family meetings were never good news in our household. The next evening, I drove to Maple Street feeling like I was heading to an execution. Sarah and Mark's cars were in the driveway alongside Dad's pickup, but Mom's sedan was missing. Sarah answered the door, and her expression immediately told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. She looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. "Hey, Becca, they're in the living room." Dad and Mark were sitting on the couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless Christmas mornings and family movie nights. They looked up when I entered, and the atmosphere was so formal it felt like a business meeting. "Where's Mom?" I asked, taking the armchair across from them. "She's at book club," Dad said, which we all knew was a lie. Mom's book club met on Wednesdays, not Fridays. "Okay." I settled into the chair, trying to read the room. "What did you want to discuss?" Dad cleared his throat. "We've run into a situation, and we need to ask for your help." The word help again. I was starting to hate that word. "What kind of situation?" Mark spoke up for the first time. "Sarah and I weren't prepared for the full cost of home ownership, the mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance costs. It's more than we budgeted for." I looked between the three of them, understanding beginning to dawn. "You can't afford the house." "It's not that we can't afford it," Sarah said quickly, appearing in the doorway. "It's just tight right now with the wedding expenses and everything." Dad leaned forward. "The thing is, Rebecca, we need somewhere to stay while we figure things out. Your vacation house has been sitting empty most of the time anyway." There it was, the ask I should have seen coming from miles away. "You want to live in my vacation house?" "Just temporarily." Dad rushed to explain. Until Mark gets his promotion. Maybe 6 months, a year at most. I felt something cold and hard forming in my chest. Let me get this straight. You gave away the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, and now you want me to give you somewhere else to live because the people you gave it to can't afford it. The room went silent. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in the doorway, and Mark suddenly became very interested in his shoes. Rebecca. Dad's voice had taken on that patronizing tone again. Oh, we're family. Family helps each other out. I have been helping. My voice was steady, but I could feel 5 years of suppressed frustration bubbling up. I helped for 5 years. I saved this house from foreclosure, and you gave it away without even consulting me. We didn't give it away, Sarah protested. We gave it to family. You gave it to family, I repeated slowly. What am I? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dad stood up, his face flushing red. You're being ridiculous, Rebecca. We never asked you to pay our mortgage. You volunteered. That doesn't give you a say in our family decisions. But it does give you the right to ask for more? That's different. How is it different? Because we raised you. The words exploded out of him with such force that everyone in the room flinched. We clothed you, fed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. We paid for your college, your car, your life. Everything you have because we sacrificed for you first. The manipulation was so blatant, so perfectly crafted that for a moment I was speechless. This was the nuclear option, the parental guilt bomb designed to end all arguments. But something had shifted in me during those 2 months of watching my family celebrate their generosity with my money. Something had crystallized as I realized I'd been erased from their narrative entirely. You paid for 18 years, I said quietly. I paid for 5, and apparently your 18 years gives you ownership over my entire life, but my 5 years don't even warrant a conversation. That's not what we're saying, Sarah jumped in, trying to play peacemaker. We just need help right now. You have that beautiful house just sitting there empty. My beautiful house that I worked 80-hour weeks to afford. My beautiful house that I bought as a retreat from the stress of supporting everyone else's dreams while neglecting my own. Mark finally looked up. We could pay rent. I almost laughed. With what money? You just said you can't afford the house you got for free. The conversation devolved quickly from there. Dad accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. Sarah cried about family loyalty. Mark sat there looking like he wished he'd never married into this dysfunction. But the breaking point came when Dad played his final card. If you won't help us, Rebecca, then I guess we know where we stand. I guess we know what family means to you. The threat was clear: comply or be cast out. Support us financially or lose us entirely. I stood up slowly, looking around the living room one last time. The family photos on the mantel, the piano where Sarah and I had practiced duets, the worn spot on the carpet where we'd wrestled as kids. All of it belonged to someone else now. You know what, Dad? I think we do know where we stand. I walked out of that house, Sarah's house, and got in my car. As I drove away from Maple Street, my phone started buzzing with calls from Sarah, then from Mom, who had mysteriously returned from her fictional book club meeting. I didn't answer any of them. For the first time in 5 years, I was done helping. But I had no idea that my refusal to be their financial safety net would lead to police involvement, family destruction, and a revelation that would change everything I thought I knew about the people who were supposed to love me most. The real nightmare was just beginning. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days after walking out of Sarah's house. I called in sick to work, ordered takeout, and sat in my living room staring at the wall like some kind of broken robot. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls from Mom, texts from Sarah, even a few messages from extended family members who had apparently been recruited to the cause. Rebecca, please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. Mom, I don't understand why you're being so stubborn. We're family. Sarah, your father is very hurt. This isn't like you. Mom, again. I turned my phone face down and tried to pretend none of it was happening, but on day 4, something shifted. I was lying in bed at 2 p.m., still in the same pajamas I'd been wearing since Tuesday, when I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room. I looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, defeated. That's when it hit me. I was mourning. I was grieving the loss of a family that had never actually existed. The family I thought I belonged to, the one where love was unconditional and sacrifice was mutual. That family was a fantasy. The real Thompson family operated on a simple economy. Rebecca gives, everyone else takes, and gratitude is optional. I got up, showered, and did something I should have done years ago. I opened my laptop and started researching. Financial abuse in families. Adult children supporting ungrateful parents. Narcissistic family dynamics. What I found in those search results was like looking into a mirror. Page after page of stories that could have been written about my own life. The golden child versus the scapegoat. The parentification of responsible children. The way financial givers become invisible once their contributions are normalized. There was even a term for what I'd become. The family ATM. I spent hours reading forum posts from people who sounded exactly like me. Adult children who had supported their families for years, only to be treated as selfish when they finally set boundaries. People who had funded siblings' educations, parents' retirements, family vacations, all while being told they were lucky to be in a position to help. One post in particular stopped me cold. The hardest part isn't the money. It's realizing that your family sees you as a resource, not a person. They don't love you. They love what you can do for them. And the moment you stop doing it, you find out who they really are. I closed the laptop and cried for the first time since leaving Sarah's house. Not the frustrated tears I'd been holding back for months, but deep, grieving sobs for the family I'd lost, even though I was starting to understand that I'd never really had them to begin with. That night, I did something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I called a therapist. Dr. Martinez had an opening the next afternoon, and sitting in her office felt like stepping into a parallel universe where my feelings actually mattered. "Tell me about your family," she said, and for the first time in years, I told the whole truth. I talked about the mortgage payments that became invisible, the wedding gift that erased my contributions, the demand for my vacation house delivered like an ultimatum. Dr. Martinez listened without judgment, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more serious as my story unfolded. "Rebecca," she said when I finished, "what you're describing is a pattern of financial exploitation coupled with emotional manipulation. In psychology, we call this economic abuse." The words hit me like a physical blow. Abuse. I'd been abused by my own family, and I'd been so deep in it that I'd thought it was normal. "They're not bad people," I said automatically, the reflex of a lifetime of making excuses for them. "Intent doesn't negate impact," Dr. Martinez replied gently. "Good people can engage in harmful behaviors, especially when it benefits them, and they've convinced themselves it's justified." Over the next 2 weeks, I met with Dr. Martinez 3 times. Each session peeled back another layer of the dysfunction I'd been swimming in for decades. She helped me see the patterns, how my family had trained me to be their financial solution, how they'd normalized my giving while simultaneously minimizing it, how they'd positioned my success as something I owed them rather than something I'd earned. But the biggest revelation came during our 3rd session. "What would happen?" Dr. Martinez asked. "If you stopped all financial support permanently?" "They'd hate me," I said immediately. "And?" "I'd lose my family." "Would you? Or would you lose people who only valued you for your money?" The question haunted me for days. If my family's love was conditional on my financial contributions, was it really love at all? Meanwhile, the pressure campaign from my family was intensifying. Mom had started showing up at my apartment building, leaving tearful voicemails about how I was tearing the family apart. Sarah sent me long text messages about how disappointed she was in me, how she never thought I could be so cold and calculating. But it was the email from Dad that finally broke something open inside me. "Rebecca, your mother and I didn't raise you to be this selfish. We're facing homelessness because of your stubborn pride, and I hope you can live with yourself knowing that you chose money over family. We expected better from the daughter we sacrificed everything for. This isn't the Rebecca we know. Homelessness. They were claiming to face homelessness because I wouldn't let them live in my vacation house for free, while they'd just given away a mortgage-free home to my sister. But what really got to me was the last line. This isn't the Rebecca we know. He was right. The Rebecca they knew was compliant, grateful, and financially useful. The Rebecca they knew never questioned their decisions or demanded recognition for her contributions. The Rebecca they knew was a carefully constructed performance designed to earn love that apparently had always been conditional. This new Rebecca, the one who was learning about boundaries and self-respect and the difference between love and manipulation, this Rebecca was a stranger to them. Good. I spent the next week documenting everything. Bank statements, emails, text messages, voicemails. I created a digital paper trail of 5 years of financial support and the family's complete dismissal of it. Dr. Martinez had suggested this exercise not for legal purposes, but for clarity. Sometimes we need to see the facts laid out objectively to overcome the emotional manipulation, she'd said. She was right. Looking at $60,000 of mortgage payments spread across 60 months, seeing the timestamps on emails where I'd offered help and they'd accepted it gratefully, reading their recent demands in the context of their complete lack of acknowledgement for my past contributions. It was like viewing my life from the outside for the first time. I also did something else Dr. Martinez had suggested. I reached out to other family members independently, not to recruit allies or air dirty laundry, but to get a reality check on my perceptions. The conversation with my Aunt Linda was particularly illuminating. "Oh, honey," she said when I explained the situation, "I wondered how your parents were managing after your dad lost his job. I had no idea you'd been covering their mortgage all this time." "They never mentioned it?" "Never. In fact, your mother's been bragging about how generous they were being able to give Sarah such a beautiful wedding gift. She made it sound like they were doing really well financially." That conversation confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. My family hadn't just erased my contributions from their internal narrative, they'd erased them from their external story too. They were taking credit for generosity that was only possible because of my financial support. The final piece of my awakening came from an unexpected source, my mortgage company. I called them to understand the process of removing myself from any future responsibility for my parents' loan. During that conversation, the representative mentioned something that stopped me cold. "According to our records, ma'am, the mortgage was actually 2 months behind when you started making payments. The foreclosure process had already begun." 2 months behind. They hadn't just been struggling, they'd been actively facing foreclosure when I stepped in. And they'd never told me how close they'd come to losing everything. My help hadn't been assistance with a temporary rough patch. It had been a complete financial rescue that had literally saved their home, and they'd given that home away without a single acknowledgement of my role in preserving it. That night, I drafted an email. Not an angry rant or an emotional plea, but a calm, factual summary of the situation. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Sarah, after much reflection, I've decided to make some changes in how I approach family relationships. Effective immediately, I will no longer be providing financial support to any family members. This includes mortgage payments, emergency funds, loan assistance, or any other monetary contributions. This decision is not made out of anger or spite, but out of a need to establish healthy boundaries. Over the past 5 years, I have contributed $67,847.50 to the family mortgage, preventing foreclosure and enabling the eventual gift of the house to Sarah. Despite this significant contribution, my input was not sought regarding major family decisions, and my financial support has been minimized or erased from family discussions. I am not asking for repayment or recognition. I am simply stepping away from a dynamic that has become unhealthy for everyone involved. I love you all and hope we can rebuild our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial obligation. Rebecca." I attached 5 years of bank statements showing every mortgage payment, then stared at the email for 20 minutes before hitting send. My phone started ringing within 10 minutes. I didn't answer. The next week was chaos. My voicemail filled up with increasingly frantic messages. Sarah showed up at my office, crying and begging me to stop this madness. Mom sent flowers with a card that said, "We love you unconditionally. Please come home." But it was Dad's response that showed me exactly who I was dealing with. He forwarded my email to the entire extended family with his own message. As you can see, Rebecca has decided that money is more important than family. We're heartbroken, but not surprised. We've always known she was different, but we never imagined she could be this cruel. Please keep Sarah and Mark in your prayers as they navigate this betrayal. Betrayal. I was the one who had betrayed them. The family group chat exploded with relatives taking sides. Some defended me, others condemned me, but the conversation revealed something stunning. Many of them had no idea about my financial contributions either. Dad's email was the first time most of the family learned that I'd been supporting my parents at all. That's when I understood the full scope of what had happened. My parents hadn't just failed to acknowledge my contributions. They'd actively hidden them. They'd spent 5 years accepting my money while maintaining the public image that they were financially stable enough to be generous to their children. My generosity had funded their reputation for generosity. 3 weeks after I sent the email, everything exploded. I was working late at my office when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Hello? Is this Rebecca Thompson? Yes? This is Officer Williams with the County Sheriff's Department. Ma'am, we have a report that you've been trespassing on property at 1247 Mountain View Drive. The property owners are asking us to contact you about staying away from the premises. My blood went cold. 1247 Mountain View Drive was my vacation house. Officer, I think there's been a mistake. That's my property. I own that house. Ma'am, the people who called this in claim you've been harassing them and refusing to leave their property. They say you've been making threats. What people? Who called this in? Robert and Linda Thompson. They say they're your parents and you've been refusing to accept that they're the legal residents of the property. The room started spinning. My parents had called the police on me for trespassing on my own property. Officer, I need to clarify something. Robert and Linda Thompson are my parents, but they do not own or rent that property. I own it. I have the deed, the mortgage documents, everything. I've never given them permission to be there, and I certainly haven't been trespassing on my own land. There was a pause. Ma'am, this is getting confusing. Are you saying your parents are lying? I'm saying there's been a serious misunderstanding. Can you meet me at the property? I can bring all my documentation. We can do that. Can you be there in an hour? I was there in 45 minutes, my hands shaking as I drove up the winding mountain road to my retreat. My sanctuary, the place I'd bought as an escape from exactly this kind of family drama. Officer Williams was waiting in his patrol car when I arrived, and I could see lights on in my house. My parents' car was in my driveway. They were actually living in my house. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your documentation, Officer Williams said as I got out of my car. I handed him the folder I'd grabbed from my home office. Deed, mortgage papers, insurance documents, utility bills, all in my name. He reviewed them with a flashlight while I stood there feeling like I was having an out-of-body experience. These all look legitimate, he said finally. The property is definitely registered to you. But ma'am, your parents are inside claiming you gave them permission to stay here and then changed your mind. They say you've been harassing them to leave. Officer, I never gave them permission to be here. I haven't even been to this property in 3 months. I have no idea how they got inside. That's when my dad appeared on the front porch, still in his pajamas despite it being nearly 10 p.m. Rebecca, he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Thank God you're here. Please tell the officer this is all a misunderstanding. I stared at him standing on my porch, in my house, acting like I was the one causing problems. Dad, what are you doing here? He walked toward us, and I could see Mom hovering in the doorway behind him. Sweetheart, we've been trying to reach you for weeks. When you wouldn't answer our calls, we figured you needed some space, so we came here to wait until you were ready to talk. The audacity was breathtaking. They'd broken into my house and were now framing it as giving me space. How did you get inside? Dad looked sheepish. We still had the spare key from that time we house sat when you went to Europe. That was 2 years ago. They'd kept my spare key for 2 years. Officer Williams looked between us. "Folks, I'm going to need everyone to take a step back here. Ma'am," he addressed me, "this is legally your property, so you have the right to ask anyone to leave. Sir," he turned to Dad, "if the property owner is asking you to vacate, you need to comply." Dad's face changed instantly. The sheepish expression vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Officer, you don't understand the situation here. Rebecca is having some kind of mental health crisis. She's been making irrational demands, cutting off contact with her family, sending threatening emails. We're concerned about her well-being, which is why we came here to try to help." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. He was trying to convince a police officer that I was mentally unstable. "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. "Rebecca, honey." Mom had joined us now, her voice taking on that syrupy tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "We know you're going through something difficult. That's why we're here. We want to help you through this rough patch." Officer Williams looked at me with new skepticism. "Ma'am, is there any truth to what they're saying? Have you been going through some personal difficulties?" The question hung in the air like a trap. How do you explain to a stranger that yes, you've been going through difficulties, but the difficulties are the people standing right in front of you claiming to want to help? "Officer, the only difficulty I've been having is setting boundaries with family members who feel entitled to my financial support and my property." "See?" Dad said, his voice heavy with false sadness. "She's been fixated on money lately. We're worried about her." That's when something inside me snapped. The careful control I'd been maintaining, the mature approach Dr. Martinez had helped me develop, the desire to handle this situation with dignity, all of it evaporated in the face of their breathtaking manipulation. "Fixated on money?" My voice rose. "I paid your mortgage for 5 years, $67,000. I saved your house from foreclosure. You gave it to Sarah, and now you're living in my house without permission while telling a police officer that I'm mentally unstable." The words echoed across the mountain air, and for a moment, everyone was silent. Officer Williams looked at Dad. "Sir, is it true that your daughter has been financially supporting you?" Dad's composure cracked slightly. "She helped us out sometimes, but—" "$67,000 isn't sometimes," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. "Officer, I have 5 years of bank statements showing monthly mortgage payments to their lender. I can email them to you right now." The dynamic shifted. Officer Williams could see the truth emerging from the layers of manipulation, and my parents could feel their narrative falling apart. "Folks," the officer said finally, "here's what's going to happen. This is Ms. Thompson's property, and she's asking you to leave. You need to gather your belongings and vacate immediately." "But we have nowhere to go," Mom said, tears starting to flow. "Sarah's house doesn't have room for us, and we can't afford a hotel." "Ma'am, that's not my concern. You're trespassing on private property." I watched my parents scramble to pack their belongings from my house, loading their car under police supervision. They moved slowly, dramatically, making sure Officer Williams could see how pathetic and displaced they appeared. But I wasn't moved by the performance anymore. I was thinking about the spare key they'd kept for 2 years, the way they'd entered my private space without permission, the lie they'd told police about me being mentally unstable, the complete absence of any acknowledgement that they were in the wrong. As their car pulled out of my driveway, Dad rolled down the window. "Rebecca, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. Family is all you have in this world, and you're throwing it away over money." I looked at this man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation. I tried to find some trace of the father I'd loved in the manipulative stranger glaring at me from his car window. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm throwing away people who only see me as money." After they left, Officer Williams and I stood in my driveway for a few more minutes while he finished his report. "Ma'am, I have to ask. Do you want to press charges for trespassing?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to. They'd violated my home, lied to police, and tried to paint me as mentally unstable. But pressing charges would make this a legal matter, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that level of escalation. "Not at this time," I said. "But I want this incident documented in case something like this happens again." Understood. And ma'am, for what it's worth, I've seen this kind of family financial manipulation before. You're not crazy, and you're not wrong to protect yourself. After he left, I sat on my front porch in the silence of the mountain night, trying to process what had just happened. My parents had broken into my house, lied to police about me, and tried to convince a law enforcement officer that I was mentally unstable, all because I'd refused to let them live in my vacation home for free. The family I'd been grieving for weeks, the loving, supportive family I thought I'd had, that family had never existed at all. The people I'd just had removed from my property by police were strangers wearing the faces of my parents. But for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. Peace. My house was mine again. My boundaries were intact, and I was finally free from the exhausting cycle of giving and giving while being told it was never enough. 3 months later, the full consequences of my decision began to unfold. Sarah and Mark defaulted on the mortgage within 6 weeks of my parents moving out. Apparently, my parents had been contributing to the household expenses with money from somewhere, probably their Social Security and Mom's library wages. But without a free place to live, they couldn't help their daughter anymore either. The house on Maple Street, the house I'd saved from foreclosure 5 years earlier, went back into foreclosure proceedings. Sarah called me crying, begging me to help them save it. I listened to her sob about losing her dream home, about how unfair it all was, about how she'd never imagined that accepting such a generous gift would lead to this disaster. When she finished, I said something that would have been impossible for the old Rebecca to say. Sarah, you received a house worth $300,000 as a wedding gift. If you couldn't afford to maintain it, you should have sold it and bought something within your means. That's not my problem to solve. She hung up on me. The extended family reached out sporadically, some offering support, others condemning my heartlessness. But the most telling response came from my Aunt Linda, who sent me a text message that I saved in my phone. Rebecca, I've been thinking about our conversation from a few months ago. I did some digging, and I found out that your parents received a significant inheritance from your great-aunt Dorothy 3 years ago, about $80,000. They told everyone it went to family expenses, but now I'm wondering if they've been living off that money instead of finding sustainable income. I thought you should know. $80,000. While I was covering their mortgage, thinking they were struggling to make ends meet, they'd had $80,000 sitting somewhere. They'd let me pay their bills while they preserved their inheritance for, what? Their retirement? Their comfort? Their ability to appear generous to Sarah? I never confronted them about the inheritance. By that point, it didn't matter. It was just one more layer of deception in a relationship built on lies. 6 months after the police incident, I got a call from Dr. Martinez asking how I was doing. Honestly, I said, sitting in my home office, in my vacation house, which had become my permanent work-from-home space. I'm better than I've been in years. And I was. The constant anxiety about family finances was gone. The walking on eggshells feeling around family gatherings was gone. The exhausting cycle of giving and giving while being told it wasn't enough was gone. In its place, I'd built something new, a chosen family of friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide, a career that was thriving now that I wasn't constantly distracted by family drama, a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to my ability to solve other people's problems. I'd started a blog called Financial Boundaries, where I wrote about family money dynamics and healthy relationship patterns. The response was overwhelming, hundreds of people sharing their own stories of being used as family ATMs, of having their generosity taken for granted, of learning to set boundaries with loved ones who saw them as resources rather than people. The blog led to speaking engagements, which led to a book deal. My story of financial family dysfunction and recovery was apparently more common than I'd ever imagined, but the most meaningful change was internal. I'd learned the difference between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and financial exploitation, between helping someone and enabling their dysfunction. My parents and Sarah never apologized. They never acknowledged their role in the breakdown of our relationships. In their version of events, I was the selfish daughter who chose money over family, who abandoned them in their time of need, who destroyed the family with my unreasonable demands. And you know what? I was okay with that narrative because I finally understood that their opinion of me didn't define my worth. The last I heard, Mom and Dad were living in a senior apartment complex paid for by selling some of their possessions and taking a reverse mortgage on their remaining assets. Sarah and Mark divorced after losing the house. Apparently, the financial stress had revealed some fundamental incompatibilities in their relationship. Sometimes I felt sad about how everything had unfolded, but I never felt guilty. Because the truth was, I hadn't destroyed our family. I'd simply stopped pretending that financial exploitation was love, that taking advantage of someone's generosity was acceptable, and that being a good daughter meant sacrificing my own well-being for people who would never return the favor. I'd spent 5 years saving their house, and they'd given it away without a thought. I'd spent 35 years trying to earn their unconditional love, only to discover it had always been conditional on my usefulness. But in the end, the best revenge wasn't anything I did to them. The best revenge was building a life where their approval was no longer necessary, where their manipulation had no power, and where I was finally free to be Rebecca Thompson. Not the family ATM, not the responsible one, not the daughter who existed to solve everyone else's problems. Just Rebecca. And for the first time in my adult life, that was enough.